Thank you for tuning in to this new YouTube edition of This Is Now Bridge to a Better World. We're back after a sudden, unexplained, and total ban from Facebook, where we were building this podcast for months. I'm Theresa. This is Ani Raven. And we, of course, do not know the reason for our expulsion from Facebook, but it took place as 60,000 opponents of Israeli militarism versus Gaza were also purged. So here we are defiantly. More on that in a minute. But first, we'll go to headlines. You may have noticed that when the recent hostilities between Israel and Gaza began, there was a report from the Israeli military, reported dutifully by American corporate news such as CNN, that there were Israeli ground troops in Gaza. That report was then retracted, causing some consternation in the press for getting such a major development wrong. And though it was analyzed otherwise, it was clearly due to the corporate news media's habit of passing on whatever they got, stenographer like, from the Israeli official channels as facts. However, it appears that there may have been an attempt to put ground troops in after all, but that the effort may have been thwarted by the Palestinian usage of effective anti-tank rockets. Radio Havana reports that Kornet and 9K-111 Russian-type anti-tank weapons were brought to bear in defense of Gaza and may have blunted the armored vanguard for an invasion. Russian-made Kornet rockets are very expensive, so it's likely this means the Gazans had access to cheaper North Korean copies, probably sourced through Syria, Iran, or Hezbollah. And also regarding the Middle East conflict, Hezbollah Secretary General Sayed Nasrallah said Wednesday that in the light of the resistance of the attack on Gaza, which he called historic and courageous, he proposes to establish a new military equation that is violation of Jerusalem equals regional war. And he's quoted saying, "We can certainly protect the holy city and we can protect the Islamic and Christian sanctuaries in this holy city," end quote. If the announcement translates to policy, it means that further aggression by Likud-directed police versus Palestinian worshippers at the Dome of the Rock will automatically engage Hezbollah, which was relatively silent during the recent conflict. And that could mean much worse rockets, of course. U.S. sanctions on Cuba, begun in 1960, are starting to bite after 60 years. Active U.S. jackal threats against buying Cuban cigars, rum, oil, drugs, sugar, nickel, and medicines have reduced international sales to a new low. The news comes on top of a 30% drop under the Trump administration's sanctions and the COVID crisis. The Biden administration is continuing the Trump sanctions by the clever expedient of doing nothing, though the UN has repeatedly condemned U.S. starvation tactics as criminal. Many U.S. citizens, including Cuban exiles, would like to help, but that is illegal in the land of the free. U.S. citizens are prohibited from traveling to Cuba as well. As a result, ordinary Cubans are now having difficulty getting enough food. This, of course, proves that capitalism is triumphant. Sarcasm warning. So we would now like to turn our attention to U.S. politics and corporate greed. Facebook rightly gets a lot of grief, but for many years, using the social media giant was working for me, and I assume for you. Like many Facebook users, I had thousands of posts and photographs that chronicled my life and my real life friends' images that provided a comforting scrapbook of the living and the dead. Over the course of more than a decade, I had created a friends list of well over 1,000 followers. I developed a habit of writing creative pieces to express my opinions and to draw likes and comments. And you also wrote creative pieces. The comments for me were the best. They amounted to immediate feedback.
Yeah, it's true. But see, Facebook has this algorithm where they actually do that for a purpose because it's that instant hit, right? It's gratification and it keeps people, it's addictive behavior.
Yeah, it worked for me.
Works for a lot of folks. Um, I like to spread myself around the social medias. And yeah, I don't know. Facebook was not where I actually looked for my creative expression.
I did. And
But it is where I like to keep in touch with my friends that are scattered across the country and around the globe. So, yeah.
Yeah, the comments amounted to immediate feedback and gratification for my narrative descriptive pieces. And I had watched others build a writing career with that sort of creative flow. Facebook pieces even helped me deal with anti-transgender oppression and with a job that was terrifying when it was not depressing, that is driving a municipal bus. I've been retired for many years now. I wrote pieces that tied down the details of my experience and made them more comprehensible, not just for the readers, but for myself. So when I left my 30 years long stint as a community radio commentator, no, I did not retire. I saw Facebook live streaming as a good venue to build up a new audience, and Ani thought the same. And she set up her computer and a couple of microphones, and we began to write scripts and improvise dialogue with the aim of creating relevant commentary. We assumed that we were as free to express our political opinions as we had been on FM People's Radio, because why not? I mean, I didn't actually think about it. I didn't think they would care much what I said, as long as I didn't,
Yeah, I didn't think they would notice because they're
incite
pretty small
violence or something.
potatoes.
Yeah.
And
Small potatoes is what I thought. Yeah.
Small potatoes. In the grander scheme of people with billions of followers, small potatoes.
Teeny spuds.
Yeah, a couple of thousand followers, whatever.
Just little guys.
But I think the other part of that was I felt a little freer actually because I could swear.
Yeah, that was, I guess I kind of enjoyed it.
I like the swearing part.
Yep.
But yeah, we hadn't actually thought about political censorship.
Yeah. So we woke up a couple of weeks ago to find out that we had been mistaken. Facebook had deleted our personal accounts. And when we tried to communicate with the corporation, we found that there was to be no negotiation, nothing, absolutely nothing. And that our crimes had led to a complete and permanent banishment of whatever the hell our crimes were.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. They don't actually have to tell us.
Yeah.
And we know that because they're a private corporation.
Yeah, the American.
And I get free speech rights don't extend to private corporations. I get all that.
Yeah, but they're a utility and they should be regulated, I think.
Well, there's that. I'll give you that too.
Okay. Well, I would argue that a long, successful, and mutually beneficial business relationship deserves more than a unilateral ghosting. But Congress has so far refused to see that the biggest communications corporation in the world is a utility for millions of its citizens, and Facebook is scarcely regulated at all. I think that should change. And there's such a thing as the Sherman Antitrust Act. I will admit I'm a bit embarrassed, much in the same way one feels when a bicycle with an inadequate lock is stolen in the night. Is there any doubt, given his actions and inactions and excuses, that Mark Zuckerberg is a white supremacist? I had a moral obligation to end that relationship sooner, and I should have bolted the pack rather than wait for the anti-justice of his corporation's jackass algorithms. Garbage in, garbage out. In any event, here we are. And I want to say first, in defiance and in service of the truth, that the apartheid Israeli Likud government under Netanyahu has committed grave human rights violations against the open-air prison known as Gaza. Were it an enclosed prison, the same standards would apply, and nor are the puny and mostly unguided rockets that were sent by Hamas the equivalent threat. We Americans help supply the Israeli military to the tune of $3.5 billion a year, and we share in its crimes. It's appropriate to speak out against it, and we will continue to do so. The U.S. police state acts very, very similarly towards its Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and against Gaza, we must stack the memories of Wounded Knee and Tulsa and many other such atrocities. Palestinians living under the colonial occupation of Europeans feel much the same as George Floyd's family. So no, Mr. Zuckerberg, we will not shut up. And speaking of apartheid, the repeated non-prosecution of white men and white militias as they prowl our streets looking to beat us down is a powerful incentive for their bullying and greatly magnifies their threat to everyone else's sense of peace and security. We are this close. I'll put my fingers up here. We are this close to a death squad outbreak, and all it will take is the realization on the part of the police and associated white militias like the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters that they can gain a great deal more paralyzing terror against BIPOC and LGBTQ and all their enemies while simultaneously getting tacit approval from white conservatives simply by disappearing dissenters and their families. And we saw a taste of that during the protests downtown last year. No one wants to call it a civil war to reestablish unquestioned white supremacy, but the fact is it's already started. And when I was writing this, the overriding thought I had is I see the occupation now. I feel occupied. Once you realize that you're not safe just going out, you're not safe in your house, depending on who you are, but this is what it's like. It's happening now, that we must fear the police. They are militarized. They are like soldiers. We have nothing to hold over them. They can do what they want. They can kill who they want.
And they have consistently blown off orders from municipalities and other governing districts as to what they can and cannot do.
Particularly the Portland police, yeah.
Well, many police departments across the country, but yes, in Portland, yeah. And so what does that mean? Who controls the police? The police police the police? They don't do it particularly well.
And who do we have to fear? We have to fear the police, but we also have to fear white men. The mass shooters are the vanguard of the new civil war. They are ethno-nationalists, racist, Trump lovers. They are degenerate, cowardly, fascist white men who fear reparations and equality so much they would rather murder and die. And I realize that this doesn't apply to everyone, but it applies to a very significant portion. It is the phenomenon that we can identify. The shooters want to intimidate their way back to 1850. Many Trump supporters, deluded into believing the disgraced ex-president was denied re-election by mysterious means, are now saying that they can win a brief civil war this summer. And I'm sorry to say that, but they believe they have the moral
Now, who
right.
says that?
Who says that?
Yeah.
They are saying that.
Who's they? I'm asking you.
Oh, okay. So this is from comments that have been made on social media, on blogs. This is overheard conversation.
I just want a little more to go on before we, were you getting this?
Yeah, this is being said in this way. I mean, it's sort of in a bus driver frame at this point, and I say that meaning that.
I mean, you've picked it up where?
I've read this from people who've heard this. They've overheard this in public settings. It's been said on blogs. It's been said on Telegram. A lot of people are saying this. And I don't know what the percentage of people who are saying this and believe it, but it's definitely out there, and it's definitely persistent. And this is what Trump is pumping up. It's, they believe they have the moral right to restore Trump's rule and their rule by any means necessary. It's a false narrative, of course, but we have all been conditioned to believe in false narratives by generations of imperial adventurers, and the reactionary right has learned to fervently believe in convenient lies. If this were not so, there are thousands of ex-soldiers who could not live with themselves. They turn their heads from bloody oppression of Black people, and they would be only too happy to make excuses for a police and militia enforced coup if it restores their hopes for unquestioned white supremacy. And that could only be stable with death squads. And I say, in that case, if you ask who is doing that, this is from polling. This is from actual polling of Republicans who say, the hell with democracy if it's going to mean that they are not going to have their accustomed power. They won't say white supremacy, but it's clear from the context that's what they mean. But I want to say another thing about Trumpers and their belligerent mendacity. I said they believe the big lie that Trump won the election, but you can point to unchallenged evidence that Trump called up election officials to bully them into changing their count. Say that to Republicans and they just won't bat an eye. It's not just that they believe, but that they choose what to believe based on their titanic fear of an equal society, on their fear of having to finally answer for the unceasing criminality of whiteness and patriarchy. It's about reparations, the word that they cannot think. They do not care what the truth is, and they have no intention of acting on the truth. And so, as I see the situation worsen, I ask myself, just how much blowback are we getting from these imperial adventures? And life under a death squad regime is familiar already to any person of color who is stopped by a white cop. In El Salvador in the 1980s, the CIA pipelined vast amounts of cash and training to death squad paramilitary units under the leadership of Roberto da Buison and others like him. And their excuse was, had to stop communism. In other words, they were thinking wrong. And it didn't matter, as Kissinger famously said about Chile, it really didn't matter that they, elected the wrong person in his view. Their excuse.
Well, and that is actually something we hear parroted by the extreme right. They are the better dead than bread crowd, but they're not thinking of themselves as the dead, right? They're, it's like that whole Cold War mentality, but it's become far more aggressive. It's become, frankly, murderous when it comes to people. They are identifying the far right, and at this point, that's half the GOP. They're identifying folks who are democratic socialists, or heaven forfend, a little left of liberal, and actually liberal they're considering as flag raving communists. So God knows what they do with a genderqueer anarchist like myself. I don't know what they do. I mean, it's just outside their frame of reference. But we're looking at exactly that same dynamic, that it's wrong thinking. And therefore, as we saw during the fall lead up to the election after the fires, people looking actively for Antifa because they believed they were very, very easy to be lied to and to buy into the lie that Antifa was setting the fires, going to get their mamas, starting to do shenanigans at polling places, all of these things because they're wrong thinkers. And I just wanted to link that back into what you're saying about death squads because we were heading there real fast last fall. We're heading there less fast now.
Hmm. I hope you're right. I remember Tiny wearing his Pinochet did nothing wrong shirt with a little helicopter and someone being kicked out of it. I mean, they were very aware of what they were emulating and what they intended to be. Um, there was a man called Roberto D'Aubuisson, and he received all kinds of money from the CIA. D'Aubuisson's favorite method of torture was a metal bed set in a shallow pool. The victim, who was to be killed after days, weeks, or months of torture, was chained to the bed and subjected to electrical shocks to the genitalia. The screams and begging were then recorded to terrorize others. And I mention this because this is the sort of person that is worshipped by Proud Boy types. D'Aubuisson was so confident in his power that he would broadcast the names of the people who were to be killed next, pretending to be only criticizing their political ideas. One of the death squads was called Mano Blanco, after the habit of leaving a white hand impression on the door of their intended victims. To some extent, the threat we face now is about imperial blowback. Many of the jackals and soldiers that we have used to terrorize the world are back at home now, and they remember some of the best times of their lives among their buddies, acting with impunity, holding fearsome weaponry, acting under orders. They were trained in terror. Here's an excerpt from Alan Nairn's reporting back in 1984 on the U.S.-supported Salvadoran death squads. He wrote, quote, "Training was also conducted in the United States. Among those who received such schooling was Carlos Sosa Santos, the leading explosives expert for the Salvadoran Armed Forces, who was instructed by the AID Public Safety Program. Sosa has trained dozens of Army and security force members in, quote, techniques for secretly placing bombs in houses, cars, and individuals' personal belongings, end quote, according to a national police intelligence officer who studied under Sosa. The U.S. contribution extends far beyond training. American intelligence services have actually furnished the names, photographs, and whereabouts of suspected dissidents, according to Salvadoran security officials, end quote." And the School of the Americas, where the training took place, has been closed now, but you can be sure that these people and their modern counterparts are firmly in the Trump faction. And this is going on today as Britt Wilkins writes in Counterpunch, quote, "The United States has been quietly funding and equipping elite paramilitary police units in El Salvador, accused of extrajudicially murdering suspected gang members, according to a forthcoming United Nations report reviewed in advance by CNN. Beginning with George W. Bush in 2003, successive U.S. administrations have provided tens of millions of dollars in aid for Salvadoran military and police in support of the government's Mano Dura, firm hand security program." And you can't tell me that they called it Mano Dura without remembering what Mano Blanco meant.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think we here in the borders of the U.S. are far from that reality, I would remind you of the death squad execution of Michael Reinl, who was gunned down in Washington just a few months ago after being accused of the murder of a Proud Boy thug. There was no pretense of a trial, just a denouncement by the fascist U.S. president and a hail of bullets, followed, of course, by a set of excuses that have been quietly accepted by the corporate press. And by the way, I'm not saying that I accept that man's murder, that I accept the Proud Boy's murder.
That you're saying you accept, I'm sorry.
I'm not accepting, I'm not accepting that Reinl was right in shooting that man down. I don't know what happened, but now we can't know because Reinl's dead.
Right. And his right to a trial
is extinguished.
Exactly, because we had an extrajudicial execution, which we're told doesn't happen in this country because of Magna Carta or something. And yet obviously it does. And obviously it's been happening since this country began. But when we have the president actually extolling that we got him, he was a bad guy and we got him. It was a beautiful thing. We said we had to get him and we got him. And we need retribution. That was his word.
Yeah. And
that is frickin' creepy and fascistic. And again, that's what I was saying earlier when I was saying we were going there super fast in the fall, because we were having the president calling for death squads.
Right. And
what I was saying is now we're still heading there, but slower. We don't have a president calling for death squads.
Yeah, and it's kind of subterranean because, I'll explain.
Go ahead.
Well, the man who was murdered downtown Portland, as opposed to Reinl, who was murdered by the police, was just one of dozens of fascists roaming our city that day, looking for, at that night, that is, looking for people to beat and or intimidate for their race and orientation, gender, or political views. And after the execution of Reinhold, the New York Times wrote, after Mr. Reinhold was killed by law enforcement, Attorney General William P. Barr said in a statement that the streets of our cities are safer. The federal government's ability to track Mr. Reinhold down, he said, was, quote, an unmistakable demonstration that the United States will be governed by law, not by violent mobs. This, of course, is and that's the end of the quote. And that, of course, is the exact opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
The idea was to demonstrate to leftists that the United States will be governed by violent armed mobs. And that's kind of the point I'm making here. It's not over, and it's turned over to now a very angry and plotting section of the Republican Party. And that whole scene was one of many precursors to the unbelievable, historic, criminal January 6th attempt to stop the Democratic elector count, to end democracy in the United States once and for all. And whereas the fascists have been bumbling and disorganized in their coup attempts so far, they've shown that they can learn from their mistakes, and they intend to double down. January 6th followed very similar and even clumsier coup attempts in the seats of government in Oregon and Michigan. And there is talk across the United States right now from infuriated, frightened white supremacists who want a showdown and want it soon. After all, something like 70% of Republicans still believe that the disgraced ex-president somehow won the election. The loser himself is constantly promoting that idea. In fact, he's kicking off a renewed set of fascist rallies this summer. He says that he wants to have one on July 4th. And finally, I want to point out that the American peculiar institutions of slavery and genocide, followed by imperialism, capitalism, Jim Crow, mass incarcerations, and casual extrajudicial execution by the police, is, well, Jim Serra of the Atlantic has our number, I think. And his article, The Cruelty is the Point, he writes, quote, we can hear the spectacle of cruel laughter throughout the Trump era. There were the Border Patrol agents cracking up at the crying immigrant children separated from their families, and the Trump advisor who delighted white supremacists when he mocked a child with Down syndrome who was separated from her mother. There were the police who laughed uproariously when the president encouraged them to abuse suspects, and the Fox News host mocking a survivor of the Pulse nightclub massacre, and in the process inundating him with threats. The survivors of sexual assault protesting to Senator Jeff Flake, the women who said the president had sexually assaulted them, and the teen survivors of the Parkland school shooting. There was the president mocking Puerto Rican accents shortly after thousands were killed and tens of thousands displaced by Hurricane Maria. The black athletes protesting unjustified killings by the police, the women of the Me Too movement who have come forward with the stories of sexual abuse, and the disabled reporter whose crime was reporting on Trump truthfully. It's not just that the perpetrators of this cruelty enjoy it, is that they enjoy it with one another. And that's why these rallies are dangerous. I'm speaking for myself. Ending that section of what Jim Serra wrote in The Atlantic, their shared laughter at the suffering of others is an adhesive that binds them to one another and to Trump, end quote.
It's the code of the bullies, right? It's the frat boys. It's those that band together to prove that they're better than, by putting the others down, by mocking them, by beating them, by being vicious. And the only people that appreciate that behavior are the other vicious people. It is that thing they bond over, because it's not a particularly human trait. I'm just going to say that
I think that it is.
Well, I don't think absolute cruelty is a human trait. I think it's what we do when we're really damaged, and that we don't want to actually go inwards and heal ourselves. We don't want to deal with therapy. We don't want to deal with our shadow selves. We don't want to deal with the fact that we've been hurt, because it means that we're vulnerable. And, a lot of these folks really appreciate the machismo myth of, the strong individual white dude that is not hurt by nothing. And so they're not going to admit that, they didn't get enough love as a kid, that somebody beat them, that somebody molested them, they're not going to admit that they've been hurt and damaged. So they're going to turn that outwards, and they're going to find other people that are really good with turning it outwards.
Yeah, I think I'm saying the same thing, really.
I don't think it's not a healthy human trait.
Yeah, it is a human trait in my view. And we bring out human traits with the stories that we tell and the company that we keep. And they have told themselves, and they've been told by the demagogue, very ugly stories. And there is a great joy in a Trump rally. They get together, they share this ugliness together, and it meets with their mutual approval. They're very happy together. This is a sick thing.
It's like if you've ever been stomped by more than one person. Okay, they get a glee going on between them. Um, there's it's and you can if you've ever seen documentaries or movies where there's that kind of a beat down happening, there is that bonding that happens because you're doing something that is really transgressive that should not be done. You are hurting somebody.
Yeah, and weirdly, this creates a
and
state of ecstasy.
and it is a very, very strange thing, and you can share that with another person who has transgressed with you. It's a very weird thing. And we are looking at a group of people who are getting off on that kind of cruelty. And this group of people have a lot of power, not the ultimate power in this country anymore,
But a lot,
but a
because they are
lot.
so bound with the cops, and the cops, um, I mean, that's what makes them very dangerous,
Mhm.
and they are actively moving towards an apartheid state. They're cutting off avenues of democratic expression, and they're happy about it.
So
They
here's a
intend.
question.
Okay.
So coming up, because we are a few days away from June, and June, we all know, is the month we get to be queer. And there's a question in New York City about allowing the police to march as the gay, lesbian, bi, trans police union, um, as a notable group. They have been marching as a group for many a year. They apparently tend to draw, like the biggest or second biggest round of applause next to Dykes on Bikes. I found that to be curious um, in the article I was reading. But there's controversy this year over whether that's going to be allowed because of the atrocious behavior of the police that has come to light for some people, but has been known by others for quite some time, and especially the New York City police. What do you think? To allow cops to march or not?
No, I mean, I think that the organizers should be pretty gentle about it because these things happen. You get into the military, you get into the police, you follow those narratives, and you find that you're queer after all, and you need support, and they need to be understood and supported as human beings. But if they really want to participate in the march, they should take those uniforms off, put on some ordinary clothing, and get out there and help ensure the safety of the queer marchers. If they really care about that, they'll be accepted just as much without. Well, they'd be accepted more without the uniform on, and the idea that the police department is somehow that being in the police department somehow lessened by being queer is kind of an American fallacy that I see around, for example, the Democratic Party. The idea that, well, if they're if they're good, if they're open-minded towards the LGBT community, if they're moving against racist oppression and moving towards a more egalitarian society, then we'll all just look the other way while they bomb the crap out of another country, while we actually send drones to blast apart wedding parties
Yeah,
and then blast the funerals that result from that. It's
yeah.
just the ugliest damn thing in the world. We're supposed to pretend that it's all in the name of democracy and opposing oppression and upholding women's rights, for example, is one thing they keep saying about Afghanistan. That's just bullshit.
There's
So
a
now you have
lot
my
of
opinion.
topics there.
Yeah.
I asked you about the cops in New York City. We ended up in Afghanistan.
Yep.
But
Yep.
okay, I think I followed that thread.
Well, I've been mad about those drones for a while.
Well, yeah, okay. Um, the argument is that if we encourage good cops to, be good and diversity, and we know that representation is important in police departments and yada yada, then we should encourage their participation in Pride, and we should accept them fully. Of course, the other argument is they're death squad, they're militarized. Fuck no.
Yeah, no, it just confuses the issue.
And no, I'm there on that side. Um, but I find it an interesting argument. I also think it's interesting that June is in fact Pride Month because of the history of Stonewall, which was a riot in 1968. And it was a riot because the police regularly raided and beat queer nightclubs, which of course, was illegal to be queer in the late 60s. And so um, there's something about that history in reading a couple of commentaries and letters to the editor and opinion pieces in this last week. I found it interesting that about half the people were like, look how far we've come. Stonewall was a riot because the cops used to be horrible to us, but now we have queer cop unions and they want to march, and it's so heartwarming. And look, we've come a long ways. And I do believe we have come a long ways. And in talking about being stumped by more than one person at a time, that's from my past. Because I grew up queer, and I'm kind of a, you know, um, I was a loudmouth queer girl in school, and I got beat down a fair amount. I learned to fight really well. However, that all works. But in that time, I can't really say, oh yeah, cops, they've always had my back. No, they've never had my back, ever. And so the idea that, we started as a riot and some cops are queer, that you don't get
It's
to
not going to
march.
cut it. It's like if
You just know.
a cop could come up to the door down there and be waving a rainbow flag, and I'd still jump out the window on the other side.
Because cop is
Yeah.
scary. And I don't know what you're doing with that rainbow flag. I don't trust cops. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in, a little question around. And then other people are like, but don't queer kids deserve to have role models and all? Like, yeah, they'll be a cop.
Protesters are great role models.
Yes. And also there's this whole idea about, is it queer pride? Is it a parade, or is it a march? Is it a protest?
Yes.
Should it be family friendly? Should it be everyone's accepted doing whatever they want in public? I've never seen this debate so open before. Uh, I have been going, to queer pride events since I was a teenager. Um, and the idea of the politics of respectability and pride, that has been discussed forever. And I remember being a part of a pride event in 87, 87 or 88, where the Portland Lesbian Alliance, which does not exist anymore, in Portland State University Lesbian Alliance. Now it's like the LGBTQ straight alliance of everyone and their cousin. Um, we were doing the security for the march, and uh, and I was told by the organizers shortly before, the week before, a few days before, that none of us could show up in any kind of gear or clothing that might say anyone participated in the SM lifestyle, because BDSM was um, inherently patriarchal, and we would have none of that at the um, uh, gay pride event. And this kind of floored, because I'm mean, half the group was probably into leather, and um, I wondered how it was that we could have come so far demanding sexual freedom and the right to be who we were, and at the same time immediately turning around and policing each other. That's never sat well with me. And so the idea of, no, we're a family friendly, fun parade, as opposed to we're here claiming space in public because really 55 years ago we were being subjected to electroshock therapy. Uh, that's not ancient history. I'm not into a family fun friendly event yet. Um, then again, the queer pride events that we have actually at this time, by and large, are corporate sponsored, sanitized things. Honestly, I haven't gone to one in years. Organize
Yeah.
alternate pride events. Queer Love Riot exists, or organize anti-corporate events. That's what I have to say about it.
All right then.
Anything else for you?
No, but I'm eager to hear what.
So
you
there one
gleaned
other
from
one
your
other thing.
insight.
Well, one other thing I guess for me would be, for this next week, keeping your eyes on all of what is happening with abortion laws. There Things are moving. The Supreme Court has accepted One of the challenges to one of the basic laws, one of the basic tenets of Roe. So, and we know that other states are lined up to join in and to offer more cases to keep chipping away at Roe. That is seriously a threat. There's been movement on that this week, and we'll bring more information on that next week when I hope to God we're live again.
Forced birth marches on.
And so I guess in some, what I would have to say, to consultation wise for the community this week is this is a week there's a high degree of freak out, and a lot of the freak out, it's stress and tension. There's sudden changes afoot, both with the ongoing slog of the pandemic and then with the news that, oh, everything's changing and we can get back to normal, whatever that means, without really much of a transition time, and without much of a game plan, and really without discussing what normal is or why we might not want to get back to it so quickly. And so there's a lot of stress and tension. People are dealing with depression. A lot of people are dealing with increased anxiety. It just has been a hard time. And I probably don't need to tell you that. You've probably been experiencing it. Some of that hard time is around scarcity of resources, thinking other people might be having it better or easier, somehow or another, that you're not getting to do the stuff you need to do. Other people are grabbing at your toys, right? Other people are taking your stuff. Maybe not all the way away, but it just seems like there's just not enough to go around, and it's adding to your stress and tension. And so, to that, the immediate and best thing to do is always take a deep breath. Try to find a calm place within, and release as much of that stress and tension as you can, and focus on your heart, and focus on a relationship that is going well. Focus on whether that's with, a sister or a sibling, a partner, a kid, a parent, um, somebody who has your back, and focus on your heart. And see if you can even get this person to just come and take a couple deep breaths with you. FaceTime if they're across the country or around the world, whatever. But have a moment where you can just really share some heart-centered emotional support, because that is really about the only thing that's going to help pull us through. Knowing that we're not alone, this is a hard time for a lot of people, but that heart-centered connection, and really feeling refreshed emotionally, is the best way through. Don't worry so much about scarcity. It's frightening, it's unsettling, but it's really the emotional self, the heart self, that is going to keep you whole and connected. So that's what I got.
All right, so this is now Bridge to a Better World.
You can find us in the Twitterverse at Bridge #2 Utopia. SoundCloud, you can find sound. You can find our audio for past episodes and everything except a few that we didn't have posted so fast. And you can find those at SoundCloud. This is now Bridge to a Better World.
And we're in the YouTube economy now, so please just take a couple of seconds and hit that like and subscribe, especially if you like this sort of anarcho-socialist queer perspective.
Do subscribe, won't you? We'll get used to saying that. And thanks to all of you who've been supporting us, and encouraging us to keep doing this.
Bye for now.